I tried to take it back, but it too late.
The sheriff knelt down and pointed his gun at the man and said, "You're under arrest for murder." Soon the man was sentenced to death and sent to prison. The next day, when he arrived at the prison, the guards were stunned. Never had I seen a prisoner with a parking space so low and so tall as a beast. The guards were afraid of this, and this official kid was holding him. He kept screaming, "Here comes the death row inmate." Paul, the superintendent of the prison, was not happy about this. He told him to be quiet. Death row inmates are also human beings. They should be treated with respect. When he looked up at the prisoner, he found a man whose face was full of shyness and innocence. There was no sign of the hostility on the face of the other prisoners on death row. The man introduced himself to Paul. He said his name was Coffee. After that, he held out his hand to shake Paul's hand. His dark face was full of sincerity. It was impossible to associate him with a murderer. Paul spends his days in prison supervising the torture of prisoners. At night, he had to go home and suffer himself. He suffered from a severe urethritis. When he was about to go to the toilet, he couldn't hold it in. After finishing on the spot, he collapsed in pain. That day, a little mouse appeared in the prison. He was so cute. It gave the guards a brief moment of joy. But this official boy was not happy. He chased the mouse like a madman. He ended up sweating profusely and failed to catch it. Today, a man was to be executed in the prison. Before the execution, he reminisced to Paul about the happiest time of his life, and Paul wanted him to go peacefully. The guards shaved the hair on top of his head and covered his head with a black cloth. A sponge wetted with water was placed on top of the prisoner's head, because this allows the electricity to pass quickly through the brain. Let the prisoner walk more easily. There's a psychopathic murderer in prison. He looks demented on the surface. He even needs help to get dressed, but all this is his disguise. The guards dragged the psychopath to his cell. Coffee whispered to Paul to be careful. When they reached the cell door, the pervert decided to strangle the guard's neck. Paul rushed to help but was kicked hard, and the kick hit him right where it hurts. Usually arrogant and domineering officers have been stunned, holding the baton hesitant to strike. Fortunately, the next brother grabbed the baton, successfully subdued the other party. When it was over, Paul fell to his knees with a thud. The pain cannot stand up. At that moment, the Coffee whispered to him to go over.
Boss, I need to see you down here.
Out of trust in the Coffee, Paul slowly approached the cell with pain. See, the Coffee grabbed Paul, the other hand on Paul's crotch. The light bulb above his head became brighter and brighter, and then it exploded with a poof. Coffee let go of Paul and returned to the bedside coughing loudly. Suddenly a million flying insects flew out of his mouth. Paul asked him what he had done to himself, and Coffee replied,
I helped.
After that, he lay back on the bed exhausted. Then Paul went to the toilet. He felt a relief he had never felt before, and his expression became more and more soulful. He was so happy. As a thank you for the coffee, Paul brought him some bread made by his wife. The kind Coffee gave the bread to Dale and his little mouse across the street, the psychopathic murderer who had previously made a scene in prison. To show his displeasure, spit on Paul. It was the day of Dale's execution. In the last hours of his life, the last thing he wanted to leave was his little mouse. In order for him to leave happily, the guards also helped him to prepare a stage. After his performance, Dale returned to his cell happily. He didn't expect to be taunted by his fellow officers again. He wanted to give Dale a hard time in his last days. He slowly walked forward, but he was accidentally strangled by a pervert. The pervert stroked his head and molested him. Paul was able to stop him before he let go. The official escaped, but has been scared to piss his pants. Seeing this scene, Dale laughed uncontrollably. The second generation took it all to heart. The next day, the group began to discuss the fate of the mouse. In order to comfort Dale, they concocted a good-natured lie. There's a mouse village in Florida. It was full of mice who could perform. If Dale's pet went there, Dale's pet would be a big star. Now Dale was relieved. In the middle of the conversation, the rat ran away, but he was trampled to death by an official. The man handed a rat that had just died to the man in front of him. The man put the mouse in his hand. As a light emerged, the mouse came to life. Now Dale can go in peace. The day of Dale's execution was presided over by the second generation of officials. This scum directly put the dried sponge on Dale's head, although Paul noticed the difference, but it was too late to stop it. Electricity turned on. Instantly in the prison, Coffee also felt the same pain. The official was also beaten severely for this reason. That day Paul and the warden together for afternoon tea learned that his wife had a serious brain tumor. There was no cure. In the evening, Paul had an idea. He poured sleeping pills into his drink. He hands it to a psychopathic murderer. Then he tied up the official and put him in a dark room. And that's it. They took the Coffee out of the prison without telling anyone. Then they went to the warden's house. Coffee ignored the woman's threats and went straight to the bedside. He saw that the woman was very sick. Coffee kissed her slowly. The warden's expression behind her was a bit complicated. More and more velvet from the woman's mouth into the Coffee's mouth. The clock downstairs suddenly stopped oscillating, and then the room shook violently. When all the velvet was absorbed by the Coffee, the woman returned to her old self. But this time, the Coffee did did not spit out the flying insects. She fell to the floor in great pain. Paul and the others rushed to take the Coffee back to the prison. They also released the second generation of officials. But when he came to Coffee's door, Coffee grabbed him by the hand before the flying insects all spit into the second generation of the official mouth. Finally, the second generation of the official's eyes became disoriented when he walked to the door of the psychopathic murderer. The second generation directly raised his gun and killed the other side. Then a large number of flying insects also left his body. Paul asked Coffee why he did this. Coffee did not say anything, just hold Paul's hand in his. A painful memory rushed into Paul's brain. It turned out that the two girls were killed by a psychopathic murderer. What's more hateful is, he took advantage of the two girls' love for each other. Paul left tears of pain for this. Soon the day of Coffee's execution arrived. Paul asked Coffee what he wanted and he would give it to him. He was just waiting for Coffee to say he wanted to live. But Coffee thought that helping him out was a good deed, because he did not want to suffer every day from all the pain of the world. Coffee's greatest wish is to see a movie. Coffee finally smiled while watching the movie. On the day of the execution, Coffee sat on the electric chair. The prison guard next to him had already cried tears. Paul walked up to him.